Good afternoon, everybody. My name is McPherson Altom, and this is my presentation on the Amish Church. Here we have the agenda of what we're going to be talking about during the course of this presentation. We're going to go over the role of the church in community organization, leadership within the church, Amish church services, Rumspringa, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, baptism, and then I'll have a slide with my citations. So the role of the church and community organization. What we're going to cover in this section of the presentation is what is the Ordnung, how the communities are organized, what role does the Amish church play in their daily lives, and how does the church kind of maintain order within the community. So the Ordnung is kind of their overall rule set, I guess you could say. Ordnung is German for the word order. And the Amish idea of Ordnung is kind of the divine order. It came from God. The Ordnung started guiding the church in the Amish church in 1862. In 1862, the Amish church officials started kind of a yearly meeting to resolve arguments from within the Amish communities. It discusses the requirements for baptism, voting in America, what technology is acceptable according to the teachings of Jesus, and much more to do with the Amish lifestyle. So what is their dress to be? How are they supposed to live? What jobs are okay for the Amish? So next is how the communities are organized. The Amish church communities are divided in kind of groups called gemees, which is shorthand for Gemenide. I'm positive I am pronouncing that very incorrectly because I don't speak German. Each community kind of makes decisions for themselves while also still having the overarching idea of the Ordnung. Since they don't have anything like a pope to rule their church, they have a community of bishops from each gemee in each little community that's set up. Each community or gemee is about 20 to 40 Amish families to curate their church. So what role does the Amish church play in their daily lives? Through the use of the Ordnung, the Amish church kind of guides the everyday actions of those in the Amish faith. The church also teaches how they are to live their lives through the use of the Bible, mainly the New Testament, focusing on the teachings of Jesus. The Amish teach from a very early age the teachings of the church in various ways. One of the examples that I saw was like holding the hand of a young child at dinner to kind of teach them to be patient and submit to kind of the idea of putting everybody before themselves. The church maintains order through the Ordnung, but also with yearly meetings to amend the Ordnung. Church leaders are kind of held accountable by the people within their gemees, and to even an extent, people outside the gemees. So the easiest way for me to explain it is, within here in Ohio, we have different counties. So gemees are kind of set up like smaller counties within a small area. So if, like, say, Preble County isn't doing the whole masks thing for coronavirus, Montgomery County can kind of pressure the Preble County's commissioners to say, hey, you need to do the mask thing. It's very similar to that in the Amish community. Now we're going to move on to the leadership within the church. The four kind of topics that we're going to mainly touch on here is how is leadership chosen? What is the kind of the division of leadership within the Amish church? How does leadership vary from group to group? And what are some of the checks and balances within Amish leadership? So within the Amish church, the leadership is kind of chosen during a communion service. So the only people that can take part in a communion service are those that have been baptized and are part of the Amish church. During this time, if they feel that they need to elect a new bishop, a new deacon, a new minister, they put forth a vote. At the end of the day, they go through, they do this vote, they create who's going to be on the docket, and they pull out a number of hymnals that are given with the equal number of people that are to be chosen. Inside it, they put in a Bible verse, and all the hymnals are tied with string. Each of the candidates are handed one of the hymnals, and they say a prayer. They open the hymnal, and the one that finds the hymnal with the Bible verse in it is the newly elected official. One of the big things that's different from many churches of the Christian faith is that every baptized Amish person takes a vow to accept their responsibility if they are ever called upon to step up and take more of an active role in the church. So within kind of divisional leadership, this is kind of short, but the Amish communities typically have one bishop, 2 to 3 ministers, and then kind of a deacon. So the way that kind of works is the bishop is more of like a servant with full powers. They're kind of the overarching guide, ruler. I wouldn't say ruler is the correct word, but I can't think of one off the top of my head, of that gemay. The 2 to 3 ministers are servants of the book. They're the ones that mainly work on the teachings of Jesus, the teachings of the New Testament, and other things that have to do with the church, while the deacon is more the servant of the poor. So leadership varying from group to group within the gemays is there within the Amish faith, there are different groups. And these different groups allow different uses of technology based on the decisions of the actual gemay. And those decisions ultimately fall to what the bishop and the other church leaders allow. Like I said, with kind of the going into pressures from outside and even peer pressure to an extent, those decisions can be overturned. So here we're going to go into kind of checks and balances, which I've touched on in some of the other things. Is a lot of the checks and balances take place are within the Ordnung and the yearly meeting to decide on what needs to be added or redacted from the Ordnung. The other main checks and balances has more to do with the people in the communities and the other communities that are around that gemay. So like one of the things is if a church does not follow the Ordnung as closely as the other communities are probably going to more harshly judge that leadership for not following the Ordnung as closely. Now we're going to move into the Amish church services, and there's so much information, so I kind of tried to pare it down to how are they conducted, where are they held, and then how is the congregation seated, because a lot of that stuff as far as where are they held in the congregation is where you're going to see a lot of the main differences from other church services from other Christian faiths like Catholicism, Presbyterian, Lutheranism, things like that. So within the Amish church, you kind of see that it's not a very different timeline than what traditional churches are. Everybody kind of enters the sanctuary. There's some opening hymnal singing. The one main difference that I've seen is that there's actually 2 sermons, and then the ministers actually separate from the main congregation to do their own separate meeting. So after the opening singing, the ministers separate from the main congregation and they meet separately. They have their first sermon, they go into a silent prayer, they do a scripture reading, then they have their main sermon. After this, they do their affirmations and acceptance of those affirmations, prayer reading, and then their benediction and closing hymn. Like I said, it's not that revolutionary as far as church services go. It's a pretty standard layout. So where are they held? This is where you kind of start to go into some of the in-depth differences between Amish faith and the other Christian faiths. The Amish don't hold their church services in the contemporary idea of a church. They hold their church services within the homes that are part of that congregation, and they actually have a wagon that holds all of the hymnals, the Bibles, the benches for everybody to sit, to store those items. And those typically arrive a week prior to the church service so that the family can set up in the barn or inside their home or in an open field, because that is where they decide that they want to hold their church services. They kind of do this as a way of putting each other's homes on display for the congregation, kind of show that they're following the Ordnung, but also it's to show that they're not as vain as having these huge churches built up as some of the other Christian faiths do. Now, the big difference that I've seen is the congregation seating. In the Amish church, the men and the women sit separately and by age and leadership roles in the church. When you're coming in to sit down, you have the role of the church always trumps age. So a bishop is going to enter before a deacon, and the church leadership always sits together, though the order might vary from group to group. The reason for sitting by age and gender instead of family units, as is traditional in other Christian faiths, is it gives more authority to the church instead of family ties. So it's more about the people in your cohort to kind of keep you in line and make sure that you're paying attention during church, instead of a mom sitting there and telling a kid to pay attention, as is traditional. Young children kind of sit with their mothers and fathers till around 9 years of age. Until then, and then they sit with their age cohort, where they'll do most of their schooling with, most of the time going to church with, and kind of the people that are going to become their new family to an extent. Fourthly, we're going to go in and talk about Rumspringa. As I said, kind of the four things we're going to talk about is what exactly is Rumspringa, what is the purpose of Rumspringa, and what happens during Rumspringa, and what are kind of some of the ramifications of Rumspringa. Again, please don't judge me, because I'm sure I'm pronouncing this incorrectly. So Rumspringa is loosely translated from Pennsylvania German to running around. It's kind of a rite of passage for the Amish youth, and at about 16 years of age is typically when Rumspringa happens. They leave the Amish community to experience outside life and kind of get a handle on what else is out there other than just their Amish faith. The purpose of Rumspringa is give the youth the ability to kind of experience outside life. So within the Amish community, they live very plainly. They don't have a lot of technology. They don't have phones, computers, televisions, things that we have, and to be honest, we kind of take for granted in today's life. They experience all of this and more that goes into their faith and through this kind of like 2-year span. It also allows them to kind of give them time to think of, do I really want to enter the church and enter the Amish community as a fully baptized Amish person, without having any doubts of what's out there for them and what they could have. What happens during Rumspringa is, for about 2 years, Amish youth kind of live outside the community. In the age of social media, Facebook actually has played a huge part in Rumspringa, and along with texting. Amish teens tend to throw huge parties and use social media to connect with other Amish teens on Rumspringa. So even though they are out on their own, they don't tend to group up with other outsiders. They try to stick within those Amish communities, which is a little odd to me, but at the end of the day, if you're comfortable with something, because some people might not understand that, I'm Amish, but I'm on Rumspringa, because not everybody's going to understand all the nuances that go into that. Some of the ramifications of Rumspringa is it gives them an opportunity to see what they're missing, I would guess you could say, and it could give them the chance that they don't want to be baptized in the Amish community and they leave it forever. Though the small portion of adults that leave the church is much smaller than those who choose to stay. One of the figures that I saw on one of my sources was that over 90% of the Amish community that goes on Rumspringa actually decides, yes, I want to stay in the church. Now we're going to go into baptism and kind of who is baptized in the Amish faith, how are they baptized, and when are they baptized. So in the Amish faith, as opposed to some of the other Christian faiths, they only baptize adults. The reason for this is that the implication of being baptized in the Amish faith are a lot heavier than in traditional Christian churches. These implications go along with following the Ordnung, the Bible, and the Amish way of life. How are they baptized? So there are only 2 baptisms a year. There's one in the spring and then one in the fall. There are 9 classes that the candidates that want to be baptized into the church must attend with church leadership. Once they are done with those classes, they are baptized in front of the entire congregation, and as they kneel, they have to agree to submit to the Ordnung. They reject the devil, and the deacon pours water over their heads, and they are baptized, and they stand up as fully realized members into the Amish church. When are they baptized? Like I said in the beginning, unlike most churches, the Amish faith doesn't believe in infant baptism. One of the reasons that they do this is they have a belief of having sin only comes with the knowledge of good and evil within the world. And obviously, as a baby, you don't have that knowledge within you, so there's really no way for you to have any sin being born into the world. Also, as I said, baptism in the Amish faith, there are more implications than normal churches. Like, one of the things is once you are baptized, you have to take a vow that at any point in time when the church calls upon you to move into a leadership role in the church, you must follow that and you must take that position. Here are my citations. The biggest one that I used was The Amish by Donald Craybill, and some other things that I found online. Thank you for watching, and I appreciate your time.